consequences of not being able to go to school early in life?
They didn't have a good education. They didn't have a good education.
They didn't have good education. So what does education help you do? 20 years from now, how will the education you're getting in school, how is that going to help you 20 years from now?
Because if you want to be a doctor, you could study everything that's medical or health.
Yes, if you want to be a doctor, you take all of these courses that are science or related to medicine. You go into college and you study medicine, and you have that foundation that you need to go to college, and you can become a doctor and make a significant higher salary as someone who's gone through school, who's graduated from college. You'll make a significantly higher salary than someone who hasn't had schooling. The jobs that you're able to do are incredibly expanded. You can be a doctor, you can be an architect, you can be pretty much anything. Whereas if you haven't gone to school, if you don't know how to read and write, then your opportunities are severely limited. Anyone can, if you can't read and write, you can't really educate yourself further through reading newspapers or through reading books. And so it was a vicious circle. And then when they got married and had children, then those children might also be put into child labor. So you see how being poor would continue on until someone got education, was able to get a better job. And as a result of the fact that they weren't able to study, then these kids who worked, they would work and work and work. Maybe they would at some point get injured, and then because they weren't educated, then they wouldn't be able to get a different job, so they might have to continue working or be left out of work because they'd gotten injured and weren't able to do much else in their original line of work. So it was definitely a really nasty thing for kids to not be able to go to school, having to work in dangerous conditions and possibly getting injured, putting them out of work later. It was very short-term thinking. Now, we talked, now that we've looked at child labor in the past, I want to ask you, how many of you think that child labor is still going on?
Raise your hand if you think child labor goes on today, somewhere in the world.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, I see a lot of raised hands. How do you think it goes on? What do you think kids are doing today?
Perhaps factories.
Working in factories, likely some of the same work. What else?
Farming.
Farming, so some of the same things. What else? What are some things you think might be different?
Delivering newspapers. What could be different though that they're doing today that they didn't do back then? Marissa. Perhaps somehow being involved in collecting water for their families because, you know, there's not a clean water supply available.
That's very possible. What else? Anything else?
Perhaps doing more manual tasks like laundry if a family didn't have a washer.
Yeah, there's definitely children would probably do a lot of work around the house. And there's, and according to UNICEF, so UNICEF is the United Nations Children's Fund, and there are apparently an estimated 218 million children aged 5 to 17 in child labor worldwide, excluding child domestic labor. So 218 million children. And that doesn't include child domestic labor. Does anyone know what child domestic labor is?
Work in the house.
Work in the house. Yes. Now, the reason they have a good reason for excluding child domestic labor, and that's that often children who work in the house might also be able to go to school, and even though you can be a child laborer and still go to school, then we also look at child labor as oftentimes when children have to work full-time and aren't able to go to school. So child domestic labor is working around the house, but there are some kids who are servants and do that pretty much full-time. They might live in a relative's house or they might live in a stranger's house, and they have to do all the work around the house. They can't go to school and they're just kept in there. So the fact that it excludes child domestic labor does exclude some kids who might actually be working full-time inside of houses. But there's 218 million children, 5 to 17, doing all other kinds of work. So some 126 million of these kids are believed to be engaged in hazardous situations or conditions. So what are some hazardous situations or conditions?
What could be hazardous about the work that kids are doing tonight? Still working with machines?
Yeah, probably still working with machines. And there have been some new dangers as well, because there are kids who will be sorting through garbage, and sometimes our computers that we throw away, sometimes garbage gets shipped overseas, strange as that sounds, and these computers will go to trash heaps where people are actually melting down elements, which often contain dangerous things like lead or cadmium that can be poisonous, and they're melting it down, and children might often help with this kind of dangerous work. So there are some new 21st century types of child labor, like computer elements being melted down to find precious parts to sell, like gold or metals like cobalt. So this is definitely, and cell phones, all these kinds of things, when they sometimes get just thrown away, then children will end up sometimes taking the burden of that. So there's new movements to have really sustainable recycling that doesn't ship it overseas for kids to do that kind of work. But there are new problems that we've created with child labor as far as with our garbage and electronics. So some hazardous conditions also include working in mines, working with chemicals and pesticides in agriculture, or working with dangerous machinery. So again, this 21st century stuff, there weren't a whole lot of chemicals and pesticides to be used in farming in Victorian England. But now we have all these different kinds of chemicals and pesticides which might be okay for the crops, but they're not so great for kids to be handling and possibly getting on their clothes or on their skin. And child labor today also includes some of the clothes that we wear. How many of you have bought clothes from Gap before? Raise your hand if you've ever bought clothes from Gap. I see some raised hands. Okay. Well, something in your closet, if you bought it, I think it was just last year, or maybe 2 years ago, but Gap admitted that it unknowingly used child labor in India. So something that you have, that you bought from Gap, that you have in your closet, might have been made by children in a factory piecing together pieces of clothes or using heavy machinery, which is kind of startling to think about, because we think of the clothes that we buy and we think, well, how could it be made with child labor? But think about where your clothes come from. Does anyone know, have you ever looked at tags before? What are some of the places, where are some of the places your clothes come from? China is one big one, yes. What else?
Vietnam.
Vietnam. Mm-hmm. Where else?
Yeah. Taiwan.
Taiwan. Great. Where else?
Possibly European countries.
Okay, some European countries. Yes, we do get some imported clothes. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that when you buy something that is, say, made in the US or made in Europe, it tends to be, it can be, obviously this differs for each piece of clothing, but it tends to be more expensive than clothes we buy from China or Bangladesh or Vietnam. Why do you think that might be?
Why the clothes that are made here or in Europe possibly more expensive than ones that are coming from China or Taiwan or any of those type places linked? Okay, the quality is better.
That's possible. It's not always true. I mean, you can, there are definitely some, I mean, if you buy like a really high-end coat, for instance, then if you get a coat that has this technology that's made in the US, like being made in one country or another doesn't necessarily affect its quality, but depending on, but a lot of, say, coat companies in the United States might focus on pretty high-end coats, whereas certain coat factories, say, in China might focus on turning out a lot of coats. So there is some of that, but you can't really look at a tag and say just because it's from here or from there means it's better or worse. Why do you think that developed countries might have more expensive clothes? When they make clothes, it might be more expensive than developing countries?
Because maybe in developed countries
that's very possible. So obviously you can't look at your wardrobe and say everything I'm wearing is made with child labor. That's not necessarily true. But if you look at laws, do you know what the minimum wage is in your state?
Anybody know?
Well,
approximately $8.25.
$8.25. Okay. So in my state, Washington State, we have actually, I think, one of the highest minimum wages in the U.S. It's like I think it's about $8.60 something. It's pretty close to $9. And so minimum wage, all states have minimum wage. Some are lower than others, some are much higher than others. But the fact that you're required to make at least that much money, and that it has to be adults working the machinery and stuff, and that sometimes those adults may even require some kind of certification, that means that companies end up paying the people working more. So clothes that are made in countries that have these very rigorous laws will cost more than clothes made in countries that maybe don't have laws about child labor or don't have laws about who can be working in your factory. So a lot of clothes that come from developing countries are cheaper. Not necessarily because they're all made using child labor, which definitely isn't true, but because there aren't such strict laws with minimum wage and stuff like that, as well as the fact that the conversion rate is favorable, so our money can be worth more by the dollar or something. But child labor in developing countries has lots of faces, and sometimes you can't just say, oh, they must have really bad parents, because that's not true. Some impoverished parents are tricked into selling their children for a few dollars with the empty promise that they will be well cared for and will send back their wages. So imagine this, you're a really poor parent, you have your children who you want to take care of very desperately, but you can't buy all the food that they need, you can't send them to school, you really want to have better opportunities for them. So someone comes knocking at your door and says, hey, you know, your kids, they look bright, they look old enough to be working, it's really nice conditions, we'll pay them a lot, and best of all, we'll send you back the wages so that you can make some money and maybe hopefully they can come back home soon. So these parents think, oh, great, you know, this is a wonderful opportunity for my kids. They send their kids off, and their kids are put in tiny little factories, working all hours of the night at stuff which will ruin their eyes or you know, be very hard work, and may not see any of those wages. So you can't put child labor down to one thing. It's bad parents, or it's bad factory owners, or it's bad people. It's really a lot, there's a lot of trickery, there's a lot of sometimes social attitudes as well. In India, more than 20% of the economy is dependent on child labor of the labor of children, according to one estimate. So that means that child labor, even if 20% is a high figure, which I was really blown away by 20%, that's huge. But child labor is definitely really interwoven into a lot of industry, whether it's making clothes or doing work with metals or work with machinery, then child labor is really a big part of the economy. So the organization Save the Children, which is a charity, says that as many as 80 million children are working in India, which is known as the child labor capital of the world. And so Bangladesh, does anyone know where Bangladesh is? Okay, well, I'll quickly show you a map then. So Bangladesh is, so this is India right here. India, and then over here is China and Mongolia. So this is India, up there is China, and Bangladesh is right over here. So Bangladesh and India are right next to each other, and it's a southern Asian country. So Bangladesh, this is a story about, or this is the explanation of this picture. This is Alea, who is 11 years old, and she works chopping bricks together with her mother, elder sister, and little brother. So the whole family is involved in this job of chopping up bricks, which, if you've ever tried it before, is pretty hard. Depending on the amount of bricks that she breaks, she earns between US 30 to 60 cents. So 30 to 60 cents is definitely nowhere close to our minimum wage, and yet she might earn 30 to 60 cents for a whole long day of working, chopping these bricks. Very hard work on your arms, on your back. 2 months ago, a small splinter from a brick got into her eyes and caused her vision problems for weeks. and now she's back at work to help her family survive. So this thing about injuries, if you get an injury and you're not able to work, then you're suddenly deprived of all that money. Alaya is one of the estimated 4.9 million Bangladeshi working children aged 5 to 15. So there's an estimated 4.9 million Bangladeshi working children aged 5 to 15. What do you think is one reason that nobody's really sure of the exact number, or very close to exact number, of how many child laborers there are?
Too many kids working, they really can't be counted.
What else?
Kind of the same idea. Yeah, some places that are unknown, people are not coming forward and admitting it.
Some places, yeah, exactly. And this is a big thing, is that even in some of these countries, there may be certain laws regarding child labor. It might be, for instance, children under 12 shouldn't be working more than 4 hours a day. And I'm just saying that that's an example of a law which might exist. Not necessarily that does exist. But some places do have laws. But the problem is that they're not being enforced. That means that either the police, that isn't on the top of their radar, they are more worried about drugs being trafficked or something like that than they are about children working in factories, which seems maybe to them relatively harmless. Or it could be another thing of that factory owners might be hiding children, or really not. Yeah, you wouldn't come forward if it was against the law to say, I have children laboring in my factories. And then additionally, even if there's no problem, there's no laws against child labor, and if everyone in the society thinks that it's fine, it is still difficult to count the exact number of children working in jobs like chopping bricks, because they're sort of freelance, you know? It's not necessarily one giant organization that would count up all their workers. It's people who show up on a given day. So yeah, it's very difficult to estimate the exact number of child laborers for those reasons. They perform in many different capacities as domestic workers, garage helpers, factory workers, porters in railway cars and markets, workers in small foundries. So they do all of these jobs. Some of them are more dangerous than others, but all of them are definitely very bad for children. They take away their ability to go to school. And so it's often for very little or no pay, and some of them in hazardous conditions. So child labor still exists today around the world in many different forms. So I just wanted to quickly review with you guys on what we just learned. What country is called the child labor capital of the world?
India.
India. And why is it called that?
Because there are a lot more kids in child labor than there are in the United States.
There's a lot more kids there engaged in child labor than in many other places around the world. Yes, and part of the reason behind that is because India has a huge number of people. The population is huge, there's a lot of kids. But another thing is that often laws there are pretty weak, or they're not enforced, and so a lot of children working for companies and sometimes small factories, it really goes unnoticed. When there's so many people and so many other problems to deal with, child labor may not rank at the top of people's list as far as problems we need to solve. But there are people who are working to abolish child labor, to tell people this is wrong, we need to do something. So progress is starting to happen, but it's just such a monumental problem with so many kids engaged in child labor, and with it being such a key part of the economy, that it's not making really fast progress. Why do you think developing countries often rely heavily on child labor?
They need extra money.
They need extra money. That could be a big part of it. If you're a developing country, that means that you haven't, so for instance, India or Bangladesh versus the United States or England or Germany. If you're a developing country, then you often need the money. If you're a factory that's just gotten started and you don't have a whole lot of money, then are you going to hire people who have been certified, who have gone to college, who have a lot of expertise in the area, and who charge an awful lot of money per hour? Or are you going to hire children who are small, who are light, who maybe should be going to school but they're not, and who are really cheap to hire? You probably hire children. So it is, a lot of times it's about the money involved. And then what are at least 2 jobs some Bangladeshi children do? Can anyone name one right now? Chopping bricks is one. Very good. So we just saw the a story about Alea. What is another one? Here's the list of it. Okay, well, we can head back to the list. They work, as it said, they perform in many different capacities as domestic workers. So does anyone remember what a domestic worker is?
They work in the house.
Work around the house. There are also garage helpers, factory workers, porters in railway stations and markets, workers in small foundries. So these are just a few of the jobs which these children may be engaged in. So now for the right to learn part of the lesson. This is a writing activity. So taking what we just learned about child labor, I want you to open up your piece of paper or your notebook and write at least, depending on how much time you have, write around, I think a paragraph we'll have to do because we don't have too much time, but write at least one paragraph from the point of view of a child laborer. So one paragraph, that would be 46 sentences. So read the example on the next page. This one is called Chimney Sweep, and my sister wrote it in a child labor activity we did in our class, and this is hers. I climb the steep blackened chimney, holding in my coughs and splutters. I'm short of breath, so I inhale. I inhale black dust and charcoal, and my hollow coughs echo around the narrow tunnel. Tears sting my eyes, but I mustn't cry. I have to work. I scrape the chimney sides that are black with dust. It's dark and lonesome and hard to breathe. All sorts of dust fills my lungs. I cry as I sweep the chimney. So seeing this example, which is very emotional, it's very clear what the job they're doing is, chimney sweeping. Now decide what kind of child labor you are going to do. So you're going to write this from the first person. I do, or I am doing this. So maybe you're selling newspapers, breaking bricks, chimney sweeping, and also decide what time period you'll be in. Victorian times in England, early child labor in the US, or present day in a developing country. And start writing. So once you're finished, then you'll be asked to share your writing, and we'll all have to guess firstly, what is the child labor that you're involved in? So be sure to make that clear. And then also when and where are you? So taking a look at the example and being sure to explain what the child labor that you're doing is and how you feel and where you are, start writing. Okay, raise your hand once you're finished.
Right, do you want to share? You know what?
I can barely sit I'm trying to get all the charcoal I can without any falling out. I can barely breathe, I can barely see, and I can't stop bumping my head.
Okay, very good, thank you. So, anyone want to guess what is the labor he's involved in?
Coal mining.
Coal mining, yes. Very good. It's probably like the picture we saw with the people bringing up the coal or looking for coal. Yeah, that would probably be that one. Very good. Thank you. What else?
I am in Bangladesh and at the shopping break at the Cheetah Point. I start to perspire. I know that if I take a break, I will be punished viciously. I feel tears running down my cheeks. I have a chance of dirt sticking out of my head.
Great. Thank you. So you're in Bangladesh, breaking news. Thank you. Who else would like to go?
I hate my job. It's hard to breathe and I can barely see. It hurts my lungs, hurts my eyes. Where am I? What's my job?
Very good. So I'm assuming that you are, let's see, are you a chimney sweep or are you mining for coal?
Chimney sweep.
Chimney sweep, okay. And let's get one more person to share.
My hands hurt, blood dripping. I am in Victorian England. My eyes are closed before I get stuck in them. I've been here for 5 years. I was tricked, now I want to leave. I hate this job.
Okay, so does anyone want to guess what labor is she working?
Vic, you got us stumped. What's the job? Oh, okay, the bridge tipping, which would be happening in Bangladesh now. That's okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing your writing. So I'm hoping that as you were writing this and you were thinking about, how child labor conditions have changed from Victorian England to today. And today there are even more jobs that children can be engaged in. There's a lot of children doing work with clothing, with taking apart computers or cell phones to find the precious metals, lots of very dangerous work. But one thing that child labor has in common, whether it's been in the past or in the present, is that it's often dangerous and it's very bad for kids. So I hope that you can go online and take a look at some resources. If you're interested in finding out more about child labor, then lots of charities have good information about child labor, where it happens, what they're doing. So for instance, UNICEF, Save the Children, all these charities have information about child labor. And then there's also lots of information, lots of these pictures that I got were from Lewis Hine, taking pictures of child labor. So if you search Lewis Hine child labor, then you'll see some of his pictures, which are very famous, of children in various jobs. And then also, if you want to find out more about the Gap incident that happened a while back with some of their clothes being made in India with child labor, then you can also do research on that. And then also, if you want to find out about some things that other kids are doing to help, then there was a really good video that I often like to show, which is Kiran Veer Sethi teaches kids to take charge. And if you just search for that, I think if you search like Riverside School or something, you should be able to find it. And that has a video inside it where these kids, they're experiencing child labor. They're rolling incense sticks, which are to like perfume. And so then they realize how hard child labor is, and they go out to the city and they talk to people and convince them that child labor is wrong. So that's a video in her speech if you search for it to find out about what other kids are doing. So I really encourage you to find out more about child labor, look for those photographs, find out what's still happening today, and find out how you can help. And I hope that you've enjoyed learning more about child labor, although it's sort of a difficult topic to enjoy. I guess that you've learned a lot from the session. And so I would like to thank you all for being such a great audience, and I hope that you can help make a difference in this area. Thank you very much.
You have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.